65 days. That number sits at the center of everything happening right now in the Nancy Guthrie investigation, man.
If you've been tracking this mystery from the jump, you feel the mounting tension of that timeline. 65 days since a woman vanished from her Tucson sanctuary. 65 days since a camera captured what experts suspect was a chillingly staged exit. Zero answers. But tonight, we aren't just rehashing the headlines, we are dissecting a disturbing forensic reality. The FBI confirms a genetic ghost was found inside Nancy's home DNA that belongs to an absolute stranger far outside her social circle. There is no hit in CODIS, the federal database containing 20 million profiles of known predators and convicted felons. No arrests, no suspects, and a deafening silence from officials. What is actually happening behind those laboratory doors? Why has 65 days passed without a suspect when the most powerful forensic weapon on Earth is already in federal hands? Tonight, we demand answers from a woman who has cracked over 300 cold cases using the exact science now scrutinizing Nancy's DNA. Genetic sleuth C.C. Moore recently sat down to explain the psychological and technical hurdles stalling this high-stakes hunt. Her clinical breakdown is specific, and the revelation waiting at the end of this report will shift your entire perspective. This is the state of the probe right now, a tense, calculated wait for a forensic breakthrough. Nancy Guthrie, 84 mother of today, anchor Savannah Guthrie, disappeared in February 2026 from her Tucson residence. What began as a routine wellness check rapidly spiraled into a complex, dark criminal inquiry. The federal resources deployed here are abnormal, suggesting investigators are staring at something far more sinister than a simple disappearance. This multi-agency mobilization reflects a deep suspicion that they are dealing with a highly sophisticated adversary. The Pima County Sheriff has officially confirmed that foreign DNA, a biological fingerprint not belonging to Nancy, was recovered from the scene. It isn't family. It isn't in the national database. It is currently being picked apart by federal analysts. Authorities have been remarkably disciplined, refusing to disclose where the DNA was found or if they have a theory on when it was left. That tactical silence suggests they are protecting a fragile evidentiary trail, waiting for the suspect to make a psychological slip. Sheriff Chris Nanos has faced intense, sharp scrutiny throughout this investigation's frustratingly slow progress. We won't relitigate his past public inconsistencies tonight. We are focusing strictly on the forensic shadow currently hanging over the case. The evidence exists, yet the gears of justice are grinding with a suspicious, agonizing slowness that defies logic. Why the delay? Before we dive into the science, we need to understand the complex environment of the crime scene. Ashleigh Banfield's podcast has been a consistent source of leaks drawing from law enforcement insiders who are speaking in shadows. Banfield reports that sources describe the DNA situation inside the Guthrie home as hauntingly complicated. That word complicated is where C.C. Moore begins her investigative teardown of this biological mystery. When the sheriff confirmed no database match, many saw a dead end, but forensic experts saw a much more difficult path. To understand the delay, you must understand that CODIS is a digital lineup, not a universal registry. It holds 20 million profiles, but it only knows those who have already been caught in the system's net. A match can happen in mere hours, but only if the intruder has a documented criminal history. If the person has never been processed for a major crime, they remain a forensic ghost to the FBI. It doesn't include the general public or the millions who have shared their data with commercial genealogy sites. This lack of a match tells us the intruder is either a first-timer or the sample is a complex mixture. Forensic experts are increasingly focused on the possibility that the evidence is a psychological and scientific tangle of multiple contributors. A complex mixture means investigators are trying to isolate a single thread of identity from a soup of genetic material. They are working with swabs that contain the biological traces of several different people on one single surface. Every object we touch, a handle, a switch, becomes a biological archive of everyone who has ever passed through. These surfaces collect a history of touch, creating a crowded genetic map that is difficult to navigate. Standard two-person mixtures are easy to solve, but the Guthrie case appears to be a much deeper forensic labyrinth. Based on insider reports, the DNA from Nancy's home is anything but a clean, simple profile. We are looking at 3 or more contributors where the suspect's DNA might represent only 10% of the total sample. If a suspect only contributes 5 or 10% to a sample, it is unlikely to ever be the smoking gun. In practical terms, 9 units of data belong to the innocent, leaving only 1 unit for the intruder. Investigators are essentially hunting for one malicious grain of sand in a vast genetic desert. Distilling that 10%, the ghost of an unknown individual buried under a mountain of genetic static, remains the ultimate nightmare for forensic investigators today. Yet a darker layer of complexity exists. The real mystery isn't just pinpointing a suspect's shadow within that biological mess. It hinges on whether they can extract the precise high-definition genetic blueprint required to track a family tree. These are two entirely different hurdles, according to DNA authority C.C. Moore. One name currently commands absolute silence and respect in this field: C.C. Moore. As the lead genetic genealogist at Parabon Nanolabs, she sits at the helm of the most advanced forensic firm in the United States. Anyone following the grim reality of true crime over the last 5 years has felt the impact of her methodology. Her intuition and tech have resurrected over 300 cold cases, forgotten victims, and ghosts without names by pulling answers from evidence that gathered dust for decades. She represents the gold standard of forensic credibility, and her direct statements to TMZ regarding the Nancy Guthrie case have sent shockwaves through the investigation. Her testimony defied the public's desperate expectations, and its weight comes not just from the data, but from her rare decision to speak at all. Public speculation isn't her style. She only breaks her silence when the facts demand a correction to the narrative. When she explains why this specific DNA hasn't unmasked a killer yet, she's describing a wall she's personally hit from the inside. To be blunt, the sample from Nancy's residence isn't a simple puzzle. It's a chaotic, multi-layered biological cocktail. This complexity shifts the entire scientific landscape, especially when you move away from standard matching into the murky waters of genealogy. We're looking at a crowded genetic room, more than 2 contributors, likely involving multiple unidentified individuals, whose presence demands an explanation. Standard forensic testing, the kind that feeds into national databases, relies on short tandem repeats, or STR profiles. These act as a standardized set of genetic landmarks, essentially a biological barcode for identification. Science has spent decades mastering these puzzles. Labs have the software to untangle even the messiest STR webs. Experts can usually pluck the quietest voice, the minor contributor, out of the noise and run it through the system for a hit. But genealogy plays by different, more demanding rules, utilizing single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNP profiles. An SNP profile is an exhaustive map tracking hundreds of thousands of genetic markers across the entire human blueprint. It's this massive density of information that allows investigators to peer into the past and find relatives. When you feed an SNP profile into a consumer database, you aren't just looking for one person. You're hunting for a shared history: parents, siblings, or distant cousins who carry fragments of those secrets in their blood. Algorithms then sketch a family tree, forcing investigators to work their way back to the shadow in the middle. Moore's warning is clear. The tools we use to separate one person from another in a standard sample simply don't work here. The mathematical ability to peel one contributor away from another is currently a void in the world of SNP analysis. The software that lets us isolate a minor suspect in a standard mixture hasn't been invented yet for the deep data genealogy requires. The tech needed to polish a clean SNP profile from a small percentage of a messy sample is still out of reach. That 10% contributor remains a mystery because the science hit a ceiling. The complexity of the mixture is the ultimate gatekeeper. We need to look closer at the mechanics here because this is where the public's understanding of the case starts to crumble. To build these profiles, labs use microarray analysis or deep-level sequencing to read the genome. These systems scan millions of points where a single genetic letter separates one human soul from the next. The core struggle is the signal-to-noise ratio, the battle between the voice you need and the roar of everything else. Think of it like trying to hear a lone violin while 9 other instruments are screaming at the top of their lungs. The violin, the suspect's unique signature, is physically vibrating in that room, hidden but present. But isolating that one melody well enough to recognize the tune is a technical hurdle science hasn't cleared at the SNP level yet. In the older STR world, we have probabilistic genotyping like true allele or STR mix to handle the math. Courts trust these digital decoders, and they've put people behind bars when human eyes couldn't make sense of the evidence. However, those tools were built for a handful of markers, not the ocean of data points required for a family search. At the SNP level, the difficulty of separating those strands increases by orders of magnitude. When a lab looks at SNP data from a crowded sample, they see a blurred signal where every point is a collision of different lives. If a suspect has one rare genetic trait, but a more dominant person in the mix has a common one, the suspect's signal is effectively erased. The end result is a corrupted file that no database on Earth would ever accept. Genealogy sites demand absolute clarity. A profile born from a messy mixture simply triggers the system's rejection. This isn't some blunder by the feds or a lab tech's mistake. We're staring at a cold, hard technological wall. Today's toolkit wasn't built for this nightmare. Standard forensics and ancestry tracking grew up in different worlds, solving entirely different puzzles. The friction point where those two worlds collide, applying genealogy to messy forensic soup, is the bleeding edge of the craft right now. That edge is still being sharpened. C.C. Moore's take isn't an excuse. It's a chilling look at a technical void scientists are desperate to bridge. This case isn't the only one in the dark, but the massive public outcry is forcing developers to rush out code and skip the pleasantries. Let's get surgical with our sourcing here. Precision is the only thing keeping this narrative from falling into total chaos. C.C. Moore went on the record with TMZ, citing ghosts in the machine, insiders who know exactly where the investigation is hitting the dirt. Her sources claim new software is being aggressively fast-tracked, fueled entirely by the haunting weight of the Nancy Guthrie file. She dropped a name for this potential savior, Estra. A deconvolution package, perhaps birthed by a firm known as Estra. I've heard whispers of hardware arriving in about a year that could change everything, a rare move in such a guarded industry. To be clear, this is Moore's intel. It's a single source. We aren't vouching for Estra yet. We're just reporting what she put on the line. Yet the bones of her claim, the desperate hunt for SNP mixture software, fit the secret obsession researchers have harbored for a decade. The chasm between basic DNA tests and deep-dive ancestry is a well-documented scar in the scientific literature. Shadowy research groups, both government-backed and private, have been clawing at this specific door for a long, long time. Moore just gave the ghost a face. She pinned a company name and a ticking clock to a sense of absolute urgency. If she's right, and she's putting her entire reputation on the line, then Nancy Guthrie isn't just a victim anymore. She's a catalyst. She is driving the creation of tools that shouldn't exist yet. Think about the psychological weight of that kind of influence. An 84-year-old woman from Tucson is making private tech firms sweat, forcing them to build technology that isn't even commercially available. This reach into the scientific community isn't a fluke. It's a reflection of who is watching and who is twisting the arm of progress. Moore's clock is ticking at 12 months out, possibly a year. We are talking about months of waiting in the silence, not weeks. Don't expect a software patch to roll out and blow this mystery wide open by next Tuesday. But the path is being paved. Someone is out there right now laying the asphalt for a road that leads straight to the killer. That realization changes everything about how we perceive this investigation. It's not dead. It's just waiting. The stalled case narrative is a lie. This isn't a stalemate. It's a high-stakes race against the limits of human knowledge. It's a sprint between a biological secret locked in a sample and a field of scientists scrambling to forge the key. Just because the key isn't in the lock today doesn't mean the door is barred forever. It means the timeline is in the hands of engineers and geneticists, leaving the FBI genealogy unit in a state of agitated waiting. The FBI doesn't just have a unit. They have something far more organized and potentially more invasive than that. Their power flows through the DNA analysis unit, working hand in glove with an investigative genealogy program established in 2019. This program was built to weaponize the science of ancestry for federal manhunts, turning family trees into forensic maps. They take the matching tech Moore pioneered and pull it into a federal law enforcement framework where the rules are different. Moore told TMZ, "The FBI team is a coiled spring ready to pull all-nighters the second a viable profile emerges from Guthrie's evidence. If they get that specific SNP profile, they won't stop until they have a name. The Bureau is ready to burn the midnight oil." That's not a hopeful guess. It's a description of operational readiness, a machine waiting for the right fuel to ignite. A team with the badges and the mandate is sitting in position, but the legal fine print is where the real tension lives. The feds don't have a skeleton key for consumer DNA. That's a common myth that clouds the public's understanding of privacy. 23andMe and Ancestry keep their gates locked with strict data policies that keep investigators at a distance. GED match and family tree DNA are the only major players currently letting the law inside their digital walls. Federal use of this data has been governed since 2020 by interim guidelines from the Department of Justice. Those rules are strict. You only use this for violent crimes or to give a name back to unidentified remains. You need a supervisor's sign-off, a paper trail for every lead, and you only play in approved databases. The Nancy Guthrie case hits every mark for federal intervention. The only thing missing is that elusive SNP profile. There is one single bottleneck. It's not a lack of will or legal authority, it's a cold wall of forensic science. So the board is set, a trained FBI team, a legal green light, and a massive ecosystem of consumer data. Tens of millions of profiles are out there, and a killer's DNA is waiting for the science to finally catch up. Locked within a federal facility, the evidence remains trapped in a chaotic molecular puzzle, awaiting a digital breakthrough that currently exists only as a distant theoretical promise. This represents the stark reality of the situation, a snapshot of a probe stalled by the current boundaries of forensic capability. We must consider the fallout once that digital locksmith finally arrives, especially since C.C. Moore's public admission to TMZ hints at a looming seismic shift in this hunt. The grand exposure involves 50 million genetic blueprints. 50 million. That is the staggering figure C.C. Moore explicitly cited while outlining the terrifyingly vast reach of law enforcement's potential vision. This assumes that a usable genetic marker can finally be salvaged from the traces left behind in Nancy Guthrie's residence. Even though more than 50 million citizens have voluntarily surrendered their biological code to private testing firms, the industry's three dominant titans have slammed the door, ostensibly blocking investigators from scouring their digital archives. 50 million intimate biological maps are currently stored across America, belonging to individuals who merely sought to uncover their forgotten heritage through a simple mail-in kit. These were souls seeking clarity on their medical destinies, or perhaps a long-lost connection to a missing piece of their own history. Not a single person intended to act as a state informant, yet few realize that with the proper legal leverage and forensic intrusion, their most private information, specifically, the web of kinship it exposes, can be weaponized to hunt down a relative who never even stepped foot in a lab. This core pillar of forensic genealogy demands scrutiny because the general populace remains dangerously oblivious to how this invisible net truly operates. When authorities inject a suspect's genetic code into these platforms, they aren't hunting for a direct hit on the individual themselves. They are stalking ghosts through their kin, searching for any unsuspecting relative who shares enough biological architecture with the target. Anyone from a direct sibling to a remote fifth cousin becomes a potential lead if their genetic overlap is sufficient to betray a shared bloodline. After snagging a relative in the web, a specialist with C.C. Moore's analytical precision begins reverse engineering a family tree from the ground up. The objective is to pinpoint a shared progenitor and then trace the lineage forward, hunting for a descendant whose age and gender match the predator's profile. Detectives then sift through these names, weighing them against location, criminal history, and physical evidence to tighten the noose. This methodology first shocked the public conscience in 2018 when it finally unmasked the elusive Golden State Killer. Joseph James DeAngelo's decades of anonymity ended simply because a remote relative uploaded their data to an open platform. He was a ghost in the system. His own biology, absent from every official criminal ledger, he had successfully outmaneuvered the National DNA Index. Yet his own flesh and blood, innocent people, oblivious to the monster in their lineage, had unwittingly offered up the map to his hiding place. That single link sufficed. C.C. Moore signaled to the media that if a usable profile emerges from Nancy Guthrie's case, the game changes instantly. Should the technical fog lift to reveal a clear genetic signature, the federal government will likely demand legal entry into those massive private data vaults. Once those judicial barriers crumble and the data is exposed, the countdown to his capture won't be measured in seasons, but in heartbeats. It stands to reason that if they secure that critical biological key, they won't hesitate to force their way into the largest databases available. I suspect they will exert immense pressure on those corporate giants to ensure the killer's identification happens with terrifying speed. We are talking about a time frame of mere minutes or days, an astronomical leap compared to the agonizing months or years we've already endured. This is the critical threshold. Every detective's effort and every community plea in Tucson eventually converges into one decisive microscopic event. It all hinges on that singular instant when a pure genetic signal is finally isolated from a contaminated, stubborn biological mess. That breakthrough represents the chasm between 65 days of frustrating quiet and a capture that could occur with shocking bureaucratic efficiency. The digital tools are under construction, the experts are poised for action, and the legal machinery is oiled. The trap is effectively set. We only lack the voice that can force the evidence to confess. We must pause here as real-world horror rarely offers a clean finale before the final act. What remains is a cold clarity about our current stagnation. The genetic material recovered from Nancy Guthrie's home is a haunting, verified reality. The FBI holds the cards, yet the lack of handcuffs isn't due to police incompetence according to those most intimately familiar with the machinery. Instead, we are facing a psychological and technical abyss, a specific forensic challenge that has never quite materialized in this exact way until now. A murky biological cocktail where the suspect's trace is barely 10%. A situation where science knows where it needs to go but hasn't yet paved the path. By stepping into the light, C.C. Moore has granted the public a rare commodity in these secretive hunts, a glimpse behind the curtain of the why. She's explaining why 65 days have vanished into thin air, why the evidence sits silent, and why the wheels of justice seem to be spinning in place. And why, when the truth finally breaks, it will strike with a velocity that feels entirely disconnected from this long, grueling wait. Our focus now shifts to whether the timeline for this new software can be forced to shrink under the weight of public expectation. We must watch whether any other scientific Hail Mary might deliver a result before these specialized tools are even out of the box. We must also wonder if authorities are pulling on hidden strings that could unravel this entire mystery through more traditional shadow-filled paths. Genetic code isn't the sole protagonist here. It's merely the loudest voice in a narrative that likely contains much darker hidden chapters. If you possess any verified fragment of truth or have witnessed something overlooked, speak up. Your insight has previously forced the shadows to retreat. We're stalking the digital whispers, scouring every thread. It's been 65 days of heavy silence since Nancy Guthrie vanished. The trail remains hot. Forensic science is evolving, and the evidence is starting to speak. Our return is certain. This production serves as raw investigative journalism, synthesized from public archives, and documented reporting to expose what the records hide. No individual is currently branded a suspect in Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. Our analysis remains an editorial interpretation transparently labeled as such. We treat single sources with skepticism. This platform avoids character hits or fabrication, demanding a verified foundation before pointing any fingers. If you hold the truth, contact the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-35149, dial 988 for support. In the agonizing silence of an unsolved mystery, it is easy to feel entirely powerless. But the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance reveals a profound, breathtaking truth. We are all deeply connected, bound together by the invisible microscopic threads of our DNA. Right now, 50 million everyday Americans have unknowingly become the ultimate shield against the darkness. When you mail in a simple kit to search for your heritage or a lost relative, you aren't just looking backward into your own history. You might be holding the exact key that drags a monster into the light. Justice is no longer just a badge or a courtroom. It is a shared human endeavor. Science is racing relentlessly against time, building digital bridges across biological oceans to isolate a single malicious drop of truth from a chaotic mixture. But technology alone cannot heal the wound. It requires our collective courage. This story isn't just about the haunting 65 days of waiting. It is a powerful testament that the truth cannot stay buried forever. Our biology remembers. If you hold even a fragment of the truth, speak up. The shadows only win when we stay silent.